The evening had started like any other in our quiet suburb, with the gentle hum of daily life fading into the peaceful silence of night. I was carrying over a homemade lasagna to Mrs. Thompson, hoping to brighten the widow's solitary evening, when her frantic wave from the porch caught my attention. The urgency in her gesture was out of character for the usually reserved woman, sparking a flicker of concern as I approached her door. The moment my foot crossed her threshold, Mrs. Thompson's hand clasped around my arm with a surprising strength. Her eyes, wide and filled with an imploring urgency, bore into mine. "You need to see this," she whispered, her voice a mixture of fear and determination. There was no room for questions. Her grip on my arm, firm and insistent, guided me into the dimly lit living room. The warmth of the lasagna dish contrasted sharply against the chill that started to settle in my heart. Without wasting a moment, Mrs. Thompson directed me to an old armchair facing the television. "Please, sit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I obeyed, the confusion and unease within me growing with each passing second. She turned on the television, the screen flickering to life to reveal a paused image that sent my heart into a stutter. It was Mark, my husband, looking back at me from the screen, his image captured in a moment that felt both intimate and alien. "Watch," Mrs. Thompson urged, her finger trembling as she pressed play. The video resumed, displaying a scene that seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mark was sitting in a cozy cafe, not the kind of setting one would associate with his usual business meetings. His demeanor was different, relaxed in a way that I rarely saw during his moments of unwinding at home. The woman sitting across from him was laughing, her hand reaching out to touch his arm in a gesture that felt painfully intimate. As the scene played out, a tightness formed in my chest, a mix of betrayal and disbelief. How could the man I shared my life with, the man I trusted more than anyone else, be the same person in this video? Mrs. Thompson paused the video, turning to face me. Her expression was somber, her eyes reflecting a deep sorrow. "I didn't mean to pry," she began, her voice quivering. "But that's my niece, and she believes Mark is her fiancé." The room seemed to spin as her words sank in. My mind raced, trying to piece together this impossible puzzle. "But, how? Why?" I stammered, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I had to tell you. I thought it was a mistake at first, but then I saw them together, heard him call her by that pet name, the one you mentioned once." The reality of the situation hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me gasping for air in its wake. The man I believed I knew, the life we built together, all of it was now under question. "Why, Mark? Why would you do this to us?" I whispered to the empty room, the question hanging unanswered in the air. Mrs. Thompson moved to sit beside me, her presence a small comfort in the storm of emotions. "People hide their true selves sometimes, dear," she said softly, her hand finding mine, offering a solace that seemed so out of reach. "But the truth always finds its way out, one way or another." The revelation that night changed everything. What I thought would be a simple act of neighborly kindness had unraveled into a moment that would alter the course of my life. The truth about Mark, once veiled in the normalcy of our daily lives, was now laid bare, setting the stage for a confrontation that promised to be as painful as it was necessary. As I sat there, the cold lasagna forgotten, a plan began to take shape, a plan born of desperation and the need for answers. Mrs. Thompson, the neighbor I barely knew, had become my unexpected ally in the face of an unimaginable betrayal. Together, we would confront Mark, and together, we would face whatever came next. In the aftermath of the revelation, the room felt suffused with a heavy silence, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of the truth. The image of Mark, so carefree and intimate with another woman, replayed in my mind, a haunting loop that seemed to erode the foundation of our marriage with each pass. "I can't just let this go," I said, the words feeling both hollow and heavy in the dim light of Mrs. Thompson's living room. "I need to understand why." Mrs. Thompson, who had been watching me with a mix of sympathy and resolve, nodded. "And you shall. We'll confront him together," she declared, her voice stronger now, laced with a determination that belied her frail appearance. He owes you that much. But how? He'll just deny everything if I confront him alone, I countered, my mind racing through scenarios, each ending in more confusion and pain. We'll catch him off guard. Invite him here, under a different pretense. He won't expect it, and he won't be able to prepare his lies, Mrs. Thompson suggested, her eyes gleaming with a strategic sharpness. I considered her words, the gears in my mind turning. But why would he come here? To your house? I asked, trying to piece together the logistics of such a confrontation. Mrs. Thompson smiled, a wry twist of her lips. Let's just say, I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. Tea, perhaps? Men like him always underestimate the elderly. He'll think it's just a harmless invitation from a lonely old lady. The idea seemed both absurd and brilliant. Mark, with his carefully curated image of respectability, would never suspect a confrontation in the guise of a simple afternoon tea. But what will we say? How do we even begin to address this? The enormity of the situation began to settle in, the initial shock giving way to a daunting realization of the confrontation ahead. We start with the truth. We show him the evidence and watch him react. There's no rehearsal for a moment like this, dear. We'll have to trust our instincts, Mrs. Thompson advised, her hand reaching out to squeeze mine, a gesture of solidarity in our shared uncertainty. And if he denies it? I asked, the fear of that possibility a cold knot in my stomach. Then we press on. The truth has a way of breaking through even the most practiced lies. Besides, we'll have each other. You won't be facing him alone, she assured me, her conviction lending me a semblance of strength. The plan, as unconventional as it was, offered a path forward, a way to confront the betrayal that had upended my life. The thought of facing Mark, of demanding answers, was terrifying, yet the alternative, a life of doubts and lies, was unthinkable. We'll need to be careful, plan every detail. He's clever, but so are we, I said, the resolve hardening in my voice. Mrs. Thompson nodded, her expression grave. We'll outwit him yet. It's time the truth came out. The alliance formed in Mrs. Thompson's living room that night was more than a plan of confrontation, it was a pact between two women, united in their pursuit of truth. In the days that followed, we would rehearse our approach, anticipate Mark's potential responses, and bolster each other's resolve. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but one thing was clear, we would face it together, come what may. The bond forged in the crucible of betrayal and shared determination was our armor, and with it, we stepped into the unknown, ready to face the truth, whatever it might reveal. The day dawned with a sky heavy with clouds, as if nature itself sensed the turmoil that awaited. My steps felt leaden as I walked to Mrs. Thompson's house, each one a march towards an uncertain confrontation. The plan was simple yet fraught with complexity: invite Mark under the pretense of a harmless visit, then confront him with his betrayal. My heart raced, a tumult of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Mrs. Thompson greeted me with a nod, her usual warmth tempered by the gravity of our undertaking. He'll be here soon, she said, her voice steady, but I caught the undercurrent of tension. The living room, usually a place of comfort, felt like a stage set for a drama neither of us wished to play. We didn't have to wait long. Mark's knock on the door came, each rap a thunderclap in the silence that had enveloped the room. Mrs. Thompson answered, her greeting to Mark light, belying the storm that was about to break. Thank you for coming, Mark. I just thought it would be nice to catch up over some tea. Mark entered, his usual confident demeanor on display. Of course, Mrs. Thompson. It's my pleasure, he replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he spotted me. And what a pleasant surprise to see you here, dear. The casual endearment stung, a bitter reminder of the duplicity that had led us here. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. Yes, quite the surprise, I managed, my voice betraying none of the turmoil within. As we settled around the tea table, the small talk felt surreal, a thin veneer over the tension that crackled like static in the air. Mrs. Thompson poured the tea with a steady hand, her glance towards me a silent signal that the moment of truth was upon us. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the remote control we had placed discreetly on the end table. The television flickered to life, the image of Mark and the other woman at the cafe filling the screen. His face paled, his eyes darting from the screen to me, then to Mrs. Thompson. What is this?" he stammered, the mask of composure slipping. "This is you, isn't it, Mark?" With another woman, laughing, touching, betraying, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "How long has this been going on?" Mark's eyes flickered with panic, his gaze settling on me as if seeing me for the first time. "I can explain," he began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" I echoed, incredulity sharpening my tone. "It looks like betrayal. It looks like lies." Mrs. Thompson interjected, her voice firm. "Mark, we deserve the truth. All of it. How could you do this to her?" He faltered, the certainty with which he had entered the room now eroded by the weight of his secrets laid bare. I was lost," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It started as something simple, a distraction, but it grew into something I couldn't control." The words hung in the air, a confession that offered no comfort, only the confirmation of the depth of his deceit. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the shattered pieces of trust and the realization that the man I had loved was a stranger. "Why?" The question was a whisper, laden with the pain of betrayal and the ache of unspoken dreams shattered. Mark looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know," he murmured, the inadequacy of his answer a final blow. The confrontation had laid bare the truth, but it offered no solace. The man I had shared my life with, had trusted with my heart, had been leading a double life, the depth of his betrayal now undeniable. The path ahead was unclear, the future once imagined together now irrevocably altered. In the aftermath of the revelation, one thing was certain, the journey to healing would be mine to make, a journey towards rediscovering trust, strength, and ultimately, myself. The room was suffused with a silence so thick it felt almost tangible, broken only by the soft hum of the television still displaying the evidence of Mark's infidelity. The air was heavy with the aftermath of his confession, each word a nail in the coffin of the life I thought we had built together. Mark's admission hung between us, a chasm that seemed insurmountable. "I was lost," he had said, but the words offered little in the way of explanation or solace. They were a testament to his betrayal, a betrayal that had unraveled in the quiet of Mrs. Thompson's living room, under the guise of a simple tea. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Mark continued, his voice a mix of remorse and desperation. "It started out innocently enough, a conversation, a laugh. But it spiraled from there." "And you didn't think to stop? To think of me, of us?" I asked, the pain sharpening my words. Mark's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a mixture of regret and something else, fear. "I did, every single day. But by then, it felt like I was in too deep. I thought I could keep it separate from our life, that it wouldn't affect us." "How could you be so selfish?" The question was rhetorical, born out of a hurt so deep it seemed to echo around the room. Mrs. Thompson, who had been a silent witness to our exchange, spoke up. "Mark, do you have any idea of the damage you've caused? Not just to your wife, but to your entire family?" He nodded, a gesture that seemed both resigned and futile. "I know, and I'm sorry. I truly am. I've ruined everything for a fantasy, for something that wasn't real. And now, I've lost the most important thing in my life." The admission was stark, a raw acknowledgement of the havoc he had wrought. Yet, it did little to ease the sense of betrayal that clung to me like a second skin. The man I had married, had trusted with my heart, had been living a lie, leaving me to question not only our past, but my ability to trust again. What happens now, Mark? Where do we go from here? The question was mine, but the weight of it seemed to press down on all of us. Mark looked from me to Mrs. Thompson and back again, the magnitude of his decisions crashing down upon him. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll go to therapy, we can go to couples counseling. I'll end it with her, completely. I don't want to lose you. The offer was a testament to his desperation, but the damage was done. The foundation of our marriage had been built on trust, and that foundation had been irrevocably shattered. I need time, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Time to think, to understand how we got here, and whether there's anything left to save. Mark nodded, the defeat evident in his posture. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. I'm so sorry for everything. As he left Mrs. Thompson's house, the door closing softly behind him felt like the closing of a chapter, the end of the life I had known. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with pain and the daunting task of rebuilding. Yet, in the wreckage of my marriage, I knew that the journey ahead was mine to make, a journey toward healing, toward rediscovery, and perhaps, toward forgiveness. The truth had been unveiled, laying bare the fractures in a marriage I had believed unbreakable. But in its wake, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed, a resolve to face the future, whatever it might hold. The days following the confrontation felt like navigating through a thick fog, each step uncertain and heavy with the residue of betrayal. My home, once a sanctuary filled with shared dreams and laughter, now echoed with the silence of Mark's absence. The spaces he once occupied loomed large, a constant reminder of the chasm between what was and what could have been. Mrs. Thompson's presence became my solace, her wisdom and empathy a beacon through my darkest moments. She had witnessed the unraveling of my marriage, yet she stood by me, unwavering in her support. One afternoon, as we sat amidst the remnants of tea, the conversation turned to healing. How do you rebuild from something like this? I asked, the question directed more at the universe than at Mrs. Thompson. With time, she began, her voice carrying the weight of her own experiences with loss. And with a lot of self-reflection. You've been given a chance to rediscover who you are, outside of your marriage. It's a painful process, but it can also be a profound one. I just feel so lost, I confessed, the admission feeling like a small surrender. Like I don't even know where to begin. Mrs. Thompson reached across the table, her hand enveloping mine in a gesture of comfort. You begin with the smallest of steps. You embrace the pain, the anger, and the betrayal, and you allow yourself to feel them fully. It's the only way through. But what if it's too much? The fear of being consumed by my emotions was a constant shadow, trailing my every step. It will feel like that at times, she acknowledged. But you're stronger than you realize. And you're not alone. I'm here, and there are others who will be, too. You just have to be willing to let them in. The conversation shifted then, to more practical matters, legal considerations, financial arrangements, the logistics of untangling a shared life. Yet, even as we discussed these necessities, my mind wandered back to her words. The idea of rediscovering myself, of finding strength in the midst of such profound betrayal, was both daunting and strangely liberating. In the weeks that followed, I took Mrs. Thompson's advice to heart. I began journaling, pouring my thoughts and feelings onto the pages in an attempt to make sense of them. I sought therapy, a space where I could unpack the layers of my marriage and its dissolution with someone who offered guidance, but not judgment. Slowly, the fog began to lift. The moments of despair and loneliness were still there, but they were interspersed with moments of clarity and even hope. I began to envision a future that was mine alone, shaped by my desires and dreams, unencumbered by the shadow of betrayal. One evening, as I sat with Mrs. Thompson, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I found the courage to voice a newfound realization. I think I'm going to be okay, I said, the words feeling like a tentative step towards reclaiming my life. Mrs. Thompson smiled, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. I know you will be. You're already on your way. The aftermath of Mark's betrayal was a journey marked by pain, but it was also a journey of self-discovery. With each day, I moved closer to understanding not just the depth of my own resilience, but the importance of allowing myself to feel, to heal, and ultimately, to grow. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time since the revelation, it felt like a path I was ready to walk, armed with the lessons of the past and the hope for a future defined by my own terms. As the seasons changed, so did the landscape of my heart. The raw wounds of betrayal began to heal, leaving scars that spoke of survival and strength rather than of defeat. Mrs. Thompson's house, once a place of revelation and confrontation, had become a haven of healing and growth. Our meetings, initially filled with plans of confrontation and discussions of pain, had gradually shifted towards conversations about hope and the future. One crisp morning, as the first signs of spring breathed life into the world around us, I found myself sitting across from Mrs. Thompson, a sense of resolve stirring within me. The sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm glow on the table where our cups of tea sat, untouched in the moment of revelation. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," I began, breaking the comfortable silence between us. "About rediscovering who I am and embracing this chance to start anew." Mrs. Thompson smiled, her eyes reflecting the light. "And what have you discovered?" she asked, her voice gentle, encouraging. "I've realized that I've been given a rare opportunity," I said, the words flowing with more confidence than I felt. "An opportunity to redefine my life on my own terms, to pursue the dreams I had set aside for the sake of my marriage." She nodded, her smile broadening. "That sounds like a beautiful realization. Do you have any idea where you'll start?" A laugh escaped me, a sound of lightness that felt foreign yet welcome. "I'm going to travel," I declared, the decision feeling right in a way few things had since the betrayal. "I've always wanted to see the world, to experience cultures different from my own. It's something I put off for too long." "Traveling is a wonderful way to open your heart and mind," Mrs. Thompson agreed. "It sounds like the perfect first step on this new journey of yours." The conversation drifted then to destinations and dreams, to the practicalities of solo travel and the excitement of unknown adventures. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of genuine excitement, a flicker of anticipation for what lay ahead. As the afternoon waned, I stood to leave, pausing at the door to look back at the woman who had become so much more than a neighbor. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Mrs. Thompson rose, crossing the room to embrace me. "My dear, you have so much life ahead of you." "This is just the beginning," she whispered, her voice firm with conviction. Stepping out into the sunlight, I felt the weight of the past few months begin to lift. The path ahead was mine to choose, a path not defined by betrayal or pain, but by the possibilities of a future crafted by my own desires. In the days that followed, I threw myself into preparations, researching destinations, booking tickets, and planning itineraries. The process was exhilarating, each step a declaration of my newfound independence. The night before my departure, as I sat amidst the chaos of packed bags and travel guides, my phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Thompson. "Remember, this journey is not just about the places you'll see, but about the person you'll become along the way. Safe travels, my dear." Tears blurred my vision as I read her message, a mix of gratitude and determination swelling within me. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns and challenges, but it was a journey I was ready to embrace. With the dawn, I would set out on a new adventure, one that promised not just the discovery of the world but the rediscovery of myself. The betrayal that had once threatened to define me was now just a chapter in my story, a painful but pivotal turning point that had led me to this moment of departure. As I looked out at the starlit sky, I realized that this wasn't just an end, but a beginning. A beginning of a journey that was entirely my own, a journey of healing, discovery, and, ultimately, of coming home to myself. The road ahead was mine to explore, and I stepped into it with a heart open to the vastness of the world and the depths of my own strength.